Sure.
Hello again, Felicity.
Hi,
So,
hi.
so I guess we just, without much ado, we will continue our conversation from where we left off, which was essentially introductions by each of us, um, on a bit of a background in relation to this question. Now, there may be more that you would like to say in relation to your background, Felicity. Maybe you thought of something in the brief break, or you didn't have enough time.
Um, I think there'll probably be more threads that will come through as we continue to discuss the topic. Yeah, for sure.
Superb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm really happy to have this conversation. I'm just wondering where immediately to go next. I noticed that I've had two replies to my post already now, and both of them from women saying, "Shut up, men have to make themselves responsible for their urges," and which is great, and it's to be expected. But this isn't. This is. I'm saying yes, I understand that, and I'm asking women to be responsible for their skin in this game. And they don't want to hear it, those two, by the looks of it at the moment. But I'm here to raise that voice, and Felicity can say whatever she likes in response to that. I do not mind. So,
Great.
Felicity,
That's why yeah, I knew that there'll be a variety of responses and perhaps a few irate responses from women.
definitely irate. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's bound to be because I mean, one of them says, put in brackets, by a woman who was raped when she was 16. So, like my mother, as far
Mm.
as she's concerned, all men are at least potentially rapists. Well, I'm a man. Thank you for telling me that. I don't feel that there's anything in me that wants to be a rapist, but I do feel bombarded by sexuality in my culture. And the sexuality that affected me was propagated by women wielding their sexuality in a way that wanted to bombard itself into me. And so my big question there is why? And I've looked at this question a lot throughout my life, and I think what is and I've read stuff, and why do women become as pornographic models? And the classics are as well that they're poor and they're taken advantage by a man, and etc. and etc. And why does a woman sell her body to get a position on through the casting couch in a movie? Because she's abused by and I'm saying it this whining way because you can already tell that I don't think this is the whole story, because she's abused by the power she doesn't. What I say is, say you're a young woman, you can be a star, and a director's lies down on the couch, takes his pants off, and says, "You can get this role, which will make you a star and launch you into a life of fame and fortune, but you have to suck this now." Why doesn't she say, "All that I want from that fame and fortune is not worth this," and walk out the door? Why does she then suck that, take the fame and fortune, and then 10 years later or whatever, turn around and whine about it?
Yeah, I know the
She had
Me
a
Too
choice.
movement.
She had a choice. She could refuse that price she was being offered and go and make movies herself with women, about women, not make movies with men about that men want made. Go and make your own movie industry if you don't want to be abused by the nasty male movie industry. That's what I say. Do you know what I mean? And it's going to take longer. You won't be famous and you won't be rich immediately, or perhaps ever. It might take a whole generation or three, but you can do that on your own terms. So that annoys me. And it's true because they can say, "Well, I was young, I was innocent," but still, I was young and innocent. Do you know what I mean? And I, I, yes, I sold myself to women for the sake of a relationship, and it soured that relationship. And sometimes, I wish I had never given myself to that woman because she didn't want me for anything but sex. So I understand the dilemma, but do you know what I mean? If that you did have a choice, and in your soul, there was something in your soul that said, actually, I'd rather sell my soul or my body sexually for fame and fortune than retain my integrity and not have that fame and fortune that I value more highly than selling my body in this instant and then regretting it later forever.
Yeah, I mean, this opens a Pandora's box, Jonathan, because we know the world of people selling their bodies is huge, and a lot of it is subterranean, meaning we haven't even covered how young men and boys are
Mm-hmm,
manipulated and
mm-hmm.
exploited. The
In
whole realm of
Hollywood.
pedophilia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's the Hollywood pedophilia, there's the Catholic Church pedophilia, the Vatican. It's a very dark subject.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm interested is, and this is probably just the beginning of a discovery, how far back in history does this go? How far back in humanity does this kind of how would you say, exploitation on a very gross material level?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the question is a great question.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like this in the Me Too movement, right? So these very militant women who say, "Oh well, it's time we tell the world that
Yes.
such and such a director or producer, they're rapists," and they stand up at the, you know, the final what is it, the closing ceremony of the Cannes Film Festival in 2018.
Yeah.
This woman stood up and pointed to, and that's the rapist in the audience also. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's
That's
a very
brave.
valid question.
It's very
But
brave
even,
as well.
and many young men in Hollywood also were raped, and many were suicided, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah, yeah.
died young deaths. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
something, what is it? Something to do with the human being being somehow being used as commodities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so ingrained, I
Mm.
think,
Yeah.
and it's now, it's
Mm-hmm.
everywhere in every, I think,
Mm.
in every culture, bar a few lucky ones that have remained intact.
It's interesting you raise the issue of when did it start, because I immediately thought of, you used to have the Vestal Virgins, so there used to be within ancient cultures there used to be a place for temple prostitutes, and so this was, and I don't know enough about the history of this, and obviously different people researching it would have different angles on it, you know, depending on their general kind of frame of reference of how they look at the world and these things. But you know, my understanding is one thing of it was that there was a sacred ritual in it, and so that these, and they, I don't know if they were male temple prostitutes that women would go to, but I know that there were female temple prostitutes that men could go to under certain conditions and for certain reasons. And so, you know, some kind of, let's call it a transaction, took place there, and then in this temple space. And I understand that a donation was then given to the temple by the and the temple virgins obviously received some of that by the by the man. So I don't, you know, I don't really know the circumstances of that, and it's a bit difficult for us these days. I see Felicity's frozen, so I'm keeping to talking, hoping that she's going to get a signal back. Um, um, no, this could already be in the records we have a sort of a decadent practice, not the original sacred practice. Because I just like sort of quickly get in here while we're talking about ancient histories.
Yeah.
We have a thing called the Bible, which talks about a thing called the virgin birth. And obviously,
Yes.
that's felt to be a lot of nonsense now, because in the sense that how can you physically, you know, unless God is just some crazy magician who can reinvent the rules of physics at will, how
Mm-hmm.
can you have a birth, a human embryo fertilized and produce a baby without some physical um contact between a man and a woman, or between a test tube and a whatever these days?
Yeah.
But
I know.
the point is, in the ancient days, and for example, even in past the times of Christ, in the northern like countries, there was cultures whereby people used to they were more in touch with nature, and babies used to come out, I think in the winter. I have to get my maths correct, because that people would generally sleep together and make love, or sort of conceive babies only during certain times of the year, and so I think it was the spring, and it was more like just a natural rhythm. And apparently a lot of this, or at least some of it happened in their sleep. So no, they were not conscious of what was happening. And so the particularly the children that were produced in sleep, unconsciously, in this kind of very innocent contact between bodies, and sort of opportunity for the stars to sort of bring that child to birth. These children often grew up to be the leaders of their societies in terms of cultural direction. So in that terms, we can talk about virgin births, where there was no human passion and desire involved. It was a purely virginal contact. Not talking virginally physically, because physically we live in these bodies, you need transmission of fluids and reception of such and so forth for fertilization of an ovum to occur, and then the opportunity for a child to develop from that. But psychologically and spiritually, one can speak of virgin birth in those terms. And so now I can relate that back to the temple prostitutes, that it's possible that in the past there was a more innocent and even sacred attitude towards sexuality and sex that we are way past now. We could get it back. I don't see why not. Well, in fact, that's another story, and a very interesting one, about where is sexuality going, into our
Yeah,
test tubes. Is it going,
yeah.
is it leaving our bodies, and our bodies are sacralizing themselves slowly? But that's
Mm,
another issue, really, isn't it? Felicity, I'll let
yeah.
you speak.
Yeah. Yeah, great themes that you brought up, because I think one does have to go back in history, like for example, the rites of Hieros Gamos, in the is it the temples of Aphrodite? That's right. So I've been to one in Cyprus.
Wow.
Um, and what you said, I've also read about these conceptions that are only at specific times of year in order to birth the leaders, and so on and so forth. Um, it's always a perennial question. Why are there so many human beings on this planet?
Yes.
Because it grows
Well,
exponentially.
I can tell you why, Felicity. Did anyone tell you about the birds and the bees?
No, I know, but it's like, did something go wrong? Meaning that
Exactly.
perhaps conceptions are only meant to happen once or twice a year, when is the
Okay, okay.
optimum time to bring the
Yeah,
souls
right.
in a particular
Okay, right.
star.
Okay, that's interesting.
But
So maybe we're all at it so frantically that there's too many souls having to be born. It's like it's all got in the muddle.
yeah, it's a curious question, isn't it?
It's
It's
an
a curious
interesting
question
question.
between the spiritual world and the human incarnational world.
Mm, mm,
Has something gone terribly wrong? And
mm,
in that question lies, has the whole, hormonal thing, has that been manipulated so that, the, you know, and even this now, the transition now to the LGBTQ and the fluid gender may be a natural selection,
mm,
evolution
mm,
to balance out, to control this sort of like
mm.
breeding like rabbits.
Right, right, right. That's wonderful.
um
It,
it's really interesting to look at the bigger perspective
it's great.
of all that.
It reminds me of this author called John Carpenter, and he was gay. I think he was around the same time as Emerson and Oscar
Uh-huh.
Wilde and that. And he's written some wonderful books on a sort of pra- very spiritual and yet very just down to earth. He reminds me of Walt Whitman, the author of Leaves of Grass, this beautiful soul you can feel. And yet, he's very involved in sexuality, and he was gay. And he wrote about the coming third race. So he said there will be men and women, and then there will be a third sex that will be, a something other than that, and it will enable a more kind of spiritual culture to come about.
That's interesting. So John Carpenter, remind me, it's very familiar name. What
I
of
can't.
some of his
Yeah,
known books?
he wrote about society particularly. I've got one over there somewhere, but I can't remember. It's
Okay.
been a long time.
Yeah, yeah. But Steiner also spells it out, doesn't it? I don't know in how many thousand years, beings will take somehow. I don't know what kind of human form they take, but they will no longer be through the reproductive organs that we currently use are used to, but through the throat, through the voice, through the throat.
That's a long way off. That's a long way
That's
off.
a long way off.
That,
Yeah.
that's where we become gods, like in the terms of the word. In the beginning was the word that spoke all creation into existence. But yeah, it's fair enough. I mean, why not? If we're part of evolution, that presumably is where it's going. Do you know what I mean? If the whole
Mm,
universe was born from something, presumably it grows up at a certain point, it becomes a similar thing.
yeah. Yeah. What I also was thinking while you were speaking was how somehow sex is sin, right?
Uh-huh.
Somehow it's developed through the
Oh,
Judeo-Christian
right. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
ethos
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
first you have to be shamed. People have to be shamed
Mm-hmm.
for,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all an aberration because first of all, we don't really know whether Jesus had a partner or not. You see,
Mm-hmm.
that's still a subject of contention.
Yeah, yeah, but it's interesting because there's always two sides to a story, in a sense, at least two, I guess. But you say we've been shamed. Christianity brought shame about sex and turned it into a sin. But think of this: if we are to wean ourselves off sex at a certain point, it might be necessary to get a new relationship and to move from an innocent relationship to it. And maybe shame is not the best way to go about it, or maybe it is. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? There could be cosmic wisdom, great wisdom in even this kind of unpleasantness.
Yeah, no, I get your point as well. I do get your point. Also, the other point I was trying to make is how, yeah, let's say there are the powers that be,
Okay.
the ones that do have a lot of say in controlling the matrix that we live in
Okay.
putting the propaganda or putting the messages that they want humanity to be conditioned to believe. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say they do know the power of heightened Hieros Gamos. Let's say they do
Mm-hmm.
know how powerful certain unions are that don't necessarily lead to physical births,
Mm-hmm.
um, but they need to bring it down. It's like that pure spiritual energy that comes from um, you know the union of masculine and feminine on a more spiritual level. They need to kind of distort that so that the majority of human beings will never access that,
So
and
sorry,
instead,
can I just check? I understand what you're talking about. So are you
yeah,
saying that in the Helios Gamos, which is a union without progeny, without children, is that what you're
not
saying?
not necessarily with progeny. All I'm saying is there's a higher level of sexuality that I believe that the controllers know about, and they actually put shame in so that most people never get there. And
Oh, right.
also they
I
materialize
see.
sexuality. They
Ah,
it's a whole
okay.
attack on sex on higher sexuality
I see.
by
Right,
bringing in
right.
porn, by bringing
Okay.
in this kind of
By,
like, yeah,
mm, okay.
bringing it to a very gross material level.
Okay.
and locking people into those mindsets from early childhood, as we know.
So are you intimating that there's a selfish desire in that they understand this and they want to keep that understanding to themselves and not let everyone else have it?
Not so much that, more that if you, if humans are not caught in this um, trauma and drama around material sexuality,
Hmm.
then they could be quite empowered and
Hmm.
could actually
Hmm.
be, you know, starting revolutions in
Right,
peaceful
right.
ways.
Yeah.
But instead,
But
so many
so
people are
are you saying
traumatized.
are you saying that if our sexuality and our sexual relations were a lot healthier, we would have more individual and communal energy and intelligence and ability? That's a wonderful.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Purely through the fact that we could have sex, just to use that term, in a healthy way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, let's say
Wow.
porn disappeared off the face of the earth.
Okay.
Let's say somehow anybody who's been perverted into pedophilia, which we know is a lot more widespread than we are supposed to know about, right? Like most families are affected by sexual abuse in some way or another, but it's just not spoken about. So it's
Wow. Yeah, when you think about it, yeah.
generational trauma, which is part of your biography. Imagine if all that was not there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
intergenerational
Right.
trauma
Mm-hmm.
around,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sex,
Right.
violence, and
Right. Right. So are you
so
saying
I
that
think
if it
it's quite
was
deliberate.
right, so are you kind of saying that if it was it was a more natural and easy thing, it wouldn't have us so wrapped up in concerns, and then we could get on and do more important things instead?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Make make love not war, but not sex. Just
Yeah.
making more things, creating more beauty, creating more art,
Right. Yeah.
creating
Yeah.
new models of society and
Right.
economics, and you name it. But
That's
because
wonderful.
so many of us, and it's rare that you meet somebody who's not been traumatized by you know the
One way
the
or the other.
fallen
Mm.
world of sex is
Mm.
very rare. you know
Felicity, what is that big pink thing behind you? Because it keeps catching my eye. It's very.
oh, it's my
Oh,
dress.
it's cousins. Oh, okay, sorry.
I come in from the outside because there's still a lot of road work going on.
Because we're talking
Yeah.
about sex, and it's very,
Oh,
and I'm thinking about it in very fleshy terms.
oh,
It was
sorry.
really, it was
I'll take
really.
it off there. It's
It
because I
doesn't
live in a
matter.
house.
Yeah.
I live in a house where there's a lot of pink. My friend is an artist.
Oh,
You can
that's
see some of her
wonderful. That's
some of
beautiful.
her art.
Yeah,
There's some blue.
yeah. It doesn't matter.
And
Don't
I,
worry
I
about
love
me.
colors.
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
pink, so that's my
yeah.
dress.
It was just this
Let me.
kind of strange shape that kept bobbing, like pink shape that kept like, bobbing up there. It's distracting me. That's me.
Sorry.
Probably wouldn't concern anyone else. So where are we? What can
Um,
we talk about now?
where are we? Yeah,
Because
I was
I
talking about how
yeah,
there's a kind of deliberate attack on humans, the human psyche, to
hmm
keep us locked into these cycles of shame and
right,
blame.
right,
The
right,
sexes
right.
blaming each other for violating each other. It's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
quite
yeah.
tragic.
Yeah. Well, I want to blame the other side for a bit, just to get that other voice out, because we're always
Yep,
hearing the blame from the female side to the male. And my
yep,
interest at this point is to say, okay, as a male, I'm going to blame you too. And not because I want you to take all the blame, but because I want to say we're in this together. And
yep.
so you're helping this immensely from what you're saying, Felicity, because that raises up above that. That's just a confrontational stance where I brought it to. And you're saying, then once we've kind of, my hope then would be once we said, okay, you've blamed me, and I'm saying, yes, you have some responsibility too. And then Felicity's pointing out, yes, but we're all being preyed upon by powers that are more perhaps organized than we generally are. And so let's stop turning to each other and arguing each other, and look at this whole subject of A, sexuality, and B, the way it's used and manipulated, and try and extricate ourselves from all that somewhat.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's why this conversation is, I find it very valuable indeed. Yeah, because it gets nowhere, isn't it, when we say, oh yeah, it's the men are to blame or the women are to blame.
Yeah,
Because
I just want to say we're both to blame. That's my
yeah,
point. Let's take some responsibility together and then move on from this.
yeah, because we're both men and women. It's our responsibility to be conscious of how we're being manipulated. And from that consciousness, we can then make better choices and also help our friends make better choices, friends and family,
Yes.
hopefully. Yeah. And
Yes.
particularly in educating our children.
Yes.
Because I noticed, I don't know what it's like in Italy, but I noticed in British primary schools, by the time the children are 9 or 10, they are given these, very materialistic sex education classes, which luckily
Mm,
we actually refused.
mhm,
We said to the headmistress, "Sorry, our children will not be attending these. We would like to teach them ourselves."
mhm,
Right? Because yeah,
mhm. Yeah, this is a problem also because perversion's coming in now that it's being normalized. And I say that because I'm not saying perversion's okay because anyone can do it, adults can make their own choices. But I'm not using it in a denigrating term. I'm just using it purely technically because biologically, nature designed a man and a woman to come together. It's great if a man, like I love John Carpenter, he was gay. I love Walt Whitman, he was gay. I love gay people. There's nothing wrong with it. But it is a perversion from nature. And that's great because aeroplanes are a perversion from nature. Do you know what I mean? But we
mm,
have to be careful with aeroplanes and, try not to pollute the environment with them because it's not nature's way. So, as all these perversions are being normalized, whether they're technological airplanes or sexual, we need to take care. And, like you're saying, especially of our children, because it
mm,
impinges upon them very powerfully at young ages.
because they're a blank slate. They can't think for themselves yet. Mm,
They're very
yeah,
tender. They're very tender
yeah.
shoes, and they absorb
Mm,
they absorb everything. Yeah. So in Italy, it's like thankfully in some ways Italy's sort of at least 30 years behind
oh yeah,
like
yeah.
the
Because of the
UK,
yeah.
which is in many ways is a really really good thing. And hopefully it will give them a chance to. And Italy, the family is so much still more important that they have a lot of defense against, for example, the drugs problem that
Mm-hmm,
was not available in the same way in the UK. So I hope it will stand
mm-hmm.
them in good stead in terms of this. But but the other side of it is the media is insanely powerful, especially
Right.
now our children are plugged into their own handheld devices from a young age.
Yeah,
That onslaught, which all it is interested in is grabbing your attention. And sex, especially titillating sex, especially perverse sex, is a very powerful attention grabber.
yeah.
So it will be
And they
you.
link it to
Um,
music. They link it to music and films. Very clever.
yeah. So they take
Yeah,
you emotionally to places they lead your emotions musically and verbally,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then bring your sort of chemistry and your electromagnetism to places that you would never have gone normally, and your parents would
yeah.
never have taken you. So
So
yeah, we
you
have
see
a
how things have raced ahead since the days when, you're looking for a Beano magazine and,
yeah,
you know, a few inches up above that is the hard porn. It's
mm,
wow, society has changed so much.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So our meeting's going to end in 10 minutes. We could always do a
yeah,
third, but we might be enough for today.
yeah,
Um,
probably. Yeah,
yeah. So
we've covered quite a lot. Yeah.
how shall we wrap this up, Felicity?
Mm, wow.
Because we've
I think,
opened it in a sense a bit of a can of worms, which is nice.
yeah.
Worms are great. We need them to aerate the soil so
Oh,
plants can grow.
totally. To make humus.
Yeah,
I'd say, well, I welcome comments, whether this is
yes.
posted on Facebook or the comments beneath this video, because
So,
that opens more topics to explore.
yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. Bring on the worms.
Yeah, and if there's anyone else that would like to engage in further discussion along these lines or similar issues, just let us know in the comments. And,
Yeah.
we're really up for talking with people.
Yeah. Great.
So shall we leave it
Excellent.
there for now?
Yeah. Great.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cheers,
Thanks, Jonathan.
Felicity.
Yeah.
Bye for
Good
now.
conversation. Bye for now.
Cheerio.
Bye bye.